Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all here today. So, last week, we began talking about the writing of Eihei Dogen's, the 13th century Zen teacher and founder of the Soto Zen tradition in Japan. In particular, we were talking about the Fukazazenji, universal instruction in sitting meditation, Zazen. And it's roughly divided into three parts. It has sort of an introductory motivational section, which we talked about last week. And then there's a central portion that talks about the particulars of how to do Zazen. And then there's a final section in which Dogen offers some encouragement to practice this regularly. So we'll talk about this middle section today. And if you don't think you know how to do Zazen, please don't expect that you will have it all cleared up by the end of this talk, because that's not really the intention here, as we'll discuss. So I'll read, first of all, the section from the Fukazazenji. For Zazen, a quiet room is suitable. Eat and drink moderately. Cast aside all involvements and cease all affairs. Do not think, good or bad. Do not administer pros and cons. Cease all the movements of the conscious mind, the gauging of all thought and views. Have no designs on becoming a Buddha. Zazen has nothing whatsoever to do with sitting or lying down. At the site of your regular sitting, spread out a thick matting and place a cushion above it. Sit either in the full lotus or half lotus position. In the full lotus position, you first place your right foot on your left thigh and your left foot on your right thigh. In the half lotus, you simply press your left foot against your right thigh. You should have your robes and belt loosely bound and arranged in order. Then place your right hand on your left leg and your left palm facing upward on your right palm. Thumb tips touching. Thus, sit upright in correct bodily posture. Neither inclining to the left nor to the right, neither leaning forward nor backward. Be sure your ears are in plane with your shoulders and your nose is in line with your navel. Place your tongue against the front roof of your mouth with teeth and lips both shut. Your eyes should always remain open, and you should breathe gently through your nose. Once you have adjusted your posture, take a deep breath. Inhale and exhale. Rock your body to the right and to the left, and settle into a steady, immovable sitting position. Think of not thinking. How do you think of not thinking? Non-thinking. This is, in itself, the essential art of Zazen. Now, it may be supposed that Dogen just composed that entirely on his own, but actually he borrowed heavily from previous authors on the topic. And in particular, he borrowed heavily from a 11th century, so 2 centuries before Dogen, Chinese Chan teacher, Chan being the predecessor of Japanese Zen, a Chinese Chan teacher named Zhangzi. And Zhangzi wrote a piece called Seated Meditation Regulation. And just for comparison, I'll read this. The person who wishes to be a bodhisattva must understand that great compassion is the prerequisite for the development of wisdom. Great vows must be taken so that the state of samadhi, or a state of absorption, can be cultivated. All beings are to be saved and all beings are to be saved and selfishness discouraged. Do not be attached to external images and abandon involvement in the multitude of external events. Equalize the mind and body so they become one and experience no duality between motion and stillness. Measure the intake of food and water, neither too little or too much. Balance the requirements to sleep, neither too long nor too short a time. To meditate effectively, find a quiet place and sit on a thick mat. Loosen the belt and clothing. Adopt an orderly, awe-inspiring deportment that makes everything equal. Then sit in the full crossed leg position. First, place the right foot on the left thigh, and then place the left foot on the right thigh, both feet with the soles upward. However, the half-crossed leg position may also be adopted, whereby the left leg is laid across the right thigh, with the left foot resting on the right thigh. Then on the left foot, place the right hand, palm upwards. Rest the left hand, palm upwards, on the palm of the right hand and allow the thumbs to touch. Calmly and gently lift and raise the torso forward with the inward breath, then exhale, leaning the body to the left and the right. Then allow the body to settle so that the correct upright sitting posture is achieved. Do not lean to the left or to the right. Do not bend forward or lean backward. Use control of the body to make the bones, the waist, back, neck, and head all align with one another. This will prevent the breath from becoming shortened and disturbed. The ears should be aligned with the shoulders, the nose with the navel. The tongue should touch the palate, and the lips and teeth should be closed. The eyes should remain slightly open so as to prevent sleepiness. To meditate in this manner ensures a very powerful attainment of samadhi. In ancient times, monks studying meditation sat in this fashion, with the eyes slightly open. The Chan master, Fayan, would loudly blame those who meditated with their eyes closed, accusing them of abiding in the Black Mountain Spirit Cave. This has a deep meaning for those who practice this method of meditation and understand this wisdom. The body should be settled and stable. The inward and outward breaths should be balanced so that the qi is distributed evenly. Tension should be released from the entire midsection, freeing the area of the navel. Do not give rise to good and bad thoughts. When a thought arises, be aware of it. Awareness dissolves the thought. When this method is applied over a long period of time, all thoughts are forgotten and oneness is attained. This is important to master the skill of seated meditation. So I think some of the similarities there are apparent. I think it's important to mention in reading Dogen's work, as well as just all of the classic Buddhist literature, that people didn't have the same notion of intellectual property at that time. Whereas they may reference someone else, they oftentimes don't, and just use the same language if they think it fits what they are trying to convey. So this was not an example of what we would call plagiarism on the part of Dogen. He was just using portions of the text that he thought conveyed adequately the message he was trying to get across. So going through this, I mean, there's, first of all, this little section about not thinking good or bad, not administering pros and cons, not being judgmental about one's thoughts, but just sitting and watching the mind. Having no designs to become a Buddha. This sometimes is confusing because in the Mahayana tradition, there is this notion of becoming a Buddha, of aspiring to become a Buddha. But while sitting, while meditating, all such notions, all such aspirations are just a distraction. And I think that's what Dogen is trying to tell us. Don't sit there trying to make effort to become something else. And then it says it has nothing to do with sitting or lying down, even though he's talking about sitting meditation. I think this is a hint that what you're doing in sitting meditation is to inform your other activities as well. And that Zazen, broadly speaking, can be practiced at all times. It gets into some technique here about adjusting the posture, which I think is fairly straightforward and pretty uniformly recommended by people teaching meditation. Except he does get into detail about how the legs are positioned, and I wanted to make a comment about that. For people living in medieval Japan or pre-medieval China, getting into the lotus position was probably much easier. They didn't make use of chairs near as much. They were more for sitting on mats on floors and had more flexibility of the hip joints and the knee joints as a result, and could achieve such postures without damage or pain. That is not the case for most Westerners. So a variety of sitting leg postures, I think, are permissible. Just whatever is reasonably comfortable so that you can sit there for a prolonged period of time in stillness. I've adopted some more of a kneeling type position and so-called seiza position, which it doesn't involve stress on the hip joints as much anymore. Previously, in years past, I did sit cross-legged, but I just found it was becoming a distraction because of the pain. So how your legs are positioned, I don't think is terribly important, but an upright position of the torso and alignment of the head is very helpful in maintaining stillness for a long period of time. Dogen talks about keeping the eyes open, and the Zangzi talks about keeping them slightly opened to avoid, what does he say, getting into the Black Mountain Spirit Cave. With Silent meditation, one historically, one criticism of this approach is that you get into sort of a state of dead mind or blank mind where there's just nothing going on. It's like you're a stone. Um, and in general, the intent is to maintain awareness. So closing the eyes, first of all, it can encourage sleepiness. It can also encourage a lot of daydreaming. Keeping your eyes wide open for most people doesn't work real well, but keeping them very slightly open, so there's just the slightest slit of light coming through the eyelids, can be helpful. Sometimes people have trouble with their eyes crossing when they do that for a prolonged period of time. But if you just keep your eyes just very slightly open, usually that is not a problem. But then we get into this odd little section about thinking, not thinking, and non-thinking, which I'll spend a little bit of time with. This refers to a story, a Zen story. A Zen teacher, uh, Yoshan, pardon me, who was in the 8th century, I believe, perhaps the 7th. But in any case, he was a very highly regarded teacher in China of meditation. And one of his monk students one day came to ask him a question, as the story goes. And his student said, Master Yoshan, as you are sitting there, steadfast like a mountain, what are you thinking? And Yoshan responded, I'm thinking, not thinking. His student asked again, well, how do you think of not thinking? And Yoshan replied, non-thinking. That non-thinking, Hishiro, has been a topic of long dissertations. What does that mean? What is non-thinking? And there's actually quite a literature about that one word. But I think ultimately the reason there is so much literature about that one word is that fundamentally you can't quite explain it with words. It's ineffable. But I think you can talk about things that it's not. And one thing that it is not is to aim in meditation practice toward having no thoughts at all, to having a completely thoughtless or completely a mind without any thoughts, because that's unlikely to happen. And the struggle to make that happen is exactly the wrong approach. And I think that's the distinction there. He's saying, not thinking, that's not it. Thinking, that's not it. We're talking about non-thinking or something. Sometimes it's translated as beyond thinking or beneath thinking. Or if you're thinking in a temporal sense, it's before thinking. In other words, awareness that exceeds thinking, that encompasses thinking. You might think about it as the thoughts being the objects of mind, the figures of mind against the larger mind ground. Just as we talk in art about a figure and a ground, that the thoughts are appearing. But there is also the background of awareness that is boundless, like empty space, is one description. And being aware of that background, while at the same time witnessing the thoughts coming and going, may be one way of approaching this practice. The problem with any description of non-thinking is that people then start aiming toward that and start exerting effort to achieve that. And then they wonder whether they're there yet, whether they've achieved the right way to meditate. And those thoughts can also be viewed against the boundless ground of mind as just another thought. There was another Chinese teacher, Hangsa, who wrote a number of short essays and poems about meditation. And he lived about 2 centuries before Dogen. But there is a book of his writings that has been translated by Tigan Dan Layton from Chicago. And the first writing in this book, I think, is helpful. It's another way, it's another metaphorical way of thinking about what we're pointing toward. And I've read this before, so it should be familiar to some of you. The bright, boundless field. The field of boundless emptiness is what exists from the very beginning. You must purify, cure, grind down, or brush away all the tendencies you have fabricated into apparent habits. Then you can reside in the clear circle of brightness. Utter emptiness has no image. Upright independence does not rely on anything. Just expand and illuminate the original truth, unconcerned by external conditions. Accordingly, we are told to realize that not a single thing exists. In this field, birth and death do not appear. The deep source, transparent down to the bottom, can radiantly shine and can respond unencumbered to each speck of dust without becoming its partner. The subtlety of seeing and hearing transcends mere colors and sounds. The whole affair functions without leaving traces and mirrors without obscurations. Very naturally, mind and dharmas emerge and harmonize. An ancient said that non-mind enacts and fulfills the way of non-mind. Enacting and fulfilling the way of non-mind, finally you can rest. Proceeding, you are able to guide the assembly, with thoughts clear, sitting silently, wander into the center of the circle of wonder. This is how you must penetrate and study. So maybe all this leaves you with more questions than answers, but maybe that's okay. I think ultimately Zazen teaches Zazen, which implies that one needs to have a certain faith in Zazen to continue the practice, to keep coming back every day, to keep coming back every minute to Zazen is the practice. And that requires a certain amount of faith, especially early on, but even later on, to trust in Zazen, which is, in a sense, trusting in the boundless universe. So I hope this was helpful in some manner, or some of these images from the readings were helpful to you in your meditation practice. I'd like to stress that we're not aiming toward something that you're unfamiliar with. We're not aiming toward an exotic or esoteric state of mind. But in some ways, we're just allowing the mind to see thoughts, but also see through them to the greater mind ground. So we'll stop there, and we'll break up into groups, and maybe some of you can share thoughts about meditation practices, things that you've observed, share questions, and try to learn from each other. And then we'll get back together in a few minutes before we end at noon. Thank you very much for being here.